On a freezing night in 2005, Emily Sanders, a small-town dispatcher, risks everything to save 6-year-old Luke Wilson from a blazing cabin. Ignoring warnings of a collapsing roof, she braves flames barefoot, carrying the boy to safety before vanishing. Haunted by her father's sacrificial death, Emily hides her scars and struggles silently, while Luke, now a billionaire, obsessively searches for his guardian angel. 20 years later, a mysterious call and a photograph unravel her anonymity. Why is Luke so determined to find her? What secret connects their pasts, threatening to upend Emily's quiet life forever? Love stories of unsung heroes. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories. Join our community to uncover tales of courage that inspire and uplift. Share your own moments of bravery in the comments and support our channel to keep these powerful stories alive. Hit that subscribe button now. The night was a merciless beast, clawing at Emily Sanders with icy fingers as she drove home through the desolate streets of Bedford, Maine. It was December 2000 and the clock on her dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m., a silent marker of another grueling night shift as an emergency dispatcher. At 29, Emily was a lighthouse in the chaos of crises, her voice a steady beacon guiding panicked callers through their darkest moments. Years of soothing, frantic voices had forged her into someone who could hold fear at bay, even when her own heart raced. But beneath her calm exterior, she carried a wound that never healed, a shadow cast by her father, a firefighter who had perished in a burning daycare center when she was just 12. His final words, "Always do right, Emmy. When the moment comes, you'll know," echoed in her soul, a promise she both cherished and feared. Emily was a single mother, her life revolving around her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. Their small apartment was a sanctuary of love, its walls adorned with Lily's vibrant crayon drawings and a single faded photograph of Emily's father in his firefighter uniform, his smile frozen in time. Emily kept to herself, her night shifts allowing her to juggle motherhood on a shoestring budget. A kind neighbor watched Lily during those late hours, a lifeline that kept their fragile world intact. Bedford's residents knew Emily Vesey as the voice on the other end of 911, but few saw the weight she carried, the grief of a father lost to flames, the quiet resolve to never let Lily endure that same pain. That night, as snow blanketed the world in silence, an orange glow pierced the darkness along River Road. Emily's heart stuttered as she slowed her car, her eyes tracing the ominous light to a wooden cabin half hidden among pine trees. Thick black smoke poured from its eaves, curling into the sky like a warning. Her dispatcher instincts snapped into focus. She pulled over, her breath shallow, and dialed 911. "Structure fire at 42 River Road," she told her colleague, her voice clipped but steady. "Send all available units." As she stepped out into the biting cold, the heat from the blaze slapped her face, a stark contrast to the snow crunching under her boots. Through the ground floor window, she saw movement. A small boy, no older than 6, his fists pounding desperately against the glass, his screams silenced by the roar of the fire. A handful of neighbors had gathered, their faces pale under the flickering light, coats thrown haphazardly over pajamas. The air buzzed with fear and futility. Someone muttered about propane tanks in the backyard, their voice trembling with the threat of an explosion. Another said the fire department was 8 minutes out. Too long, Emily knew, for the boy trapped inside. "There's a child in there," she shouted, her voice cutting through the crackle of flames. But the crowd only stared, paralyzed by the inferno's wrath. An older woman clutched Emily's arm, her grip desperate. "Don't be foolish. You've got a daughter waiting for you. Let the firefighters handle it." The words stung, slicing through Emily's resolve like a blade. She thought of Lily, asleep in the neighbor's apartment, her tiny chest rising and falling with dreams. Emily had vowed never to leave her daughter fatherless and motherless, never to let her grow up with only a photograph to cling to. But the boy's face, pressed against the window, his eyes wide with terror as flames danced behind him, shattered her defenses. In that moment, she saw her father's face, not in memory, but in the choice before her. How many nights had she lain awake, imagining his final moments, his courage as he ran toward danger while others fled? She had sworn to protect Lily, but she couldn't let another child burn. "Not one more," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire's roar. "Not if I can stop it. A man's voice broke through the chaos, hoarse and urgent. "Don't go in. The roof's about to collapse." Emily barely registered the warning. Her hands moved on instinct, stripping off her heavy coat and wrapping it around her arm. She kicked off her shoes, the snow biting her bare feet, but the cold was a distant thought. Time slowed, each heartbeat a drum in her chest as she circled the cabin, searching for a way in. The side of the house was less consumed, a narrow window offering a sliver of hope. With her coat-wrapped arm, she smashed the glass, shards tearing through the fabric and into her forearm. Blood welled, but adrenaline numbed the pain. Smoke billowed out, choking her as she hoisted herself through the jagged opening, dropping to her knees inside to stay below the suffocating cloud. "Hello, where are you?" she called, her voice raw as the heat seared her lungs. The cabin was a maze of smoke and shadow, disorienting and deadly. A faint cry pulled her forward, a beacon in the haze. Crawling, she found the boy huddled beneath a table, his small body trembling, his pajamas singed at the edges. Soot streaked his tear-soaked face, his eyes glassy with fear. "I'm here," Emily said, her voice soft but firm, a promise carved from her soul. "I'm going to get you out." She pulled him close, tearing a strip from her shirt sleeve and pressing it to his mouth. "Cover your face with this. Stay with me." As they crawled toward the window, a section of ceiling collapsed behind them, a deafening crash that sent embers raining across the floor. The heat pressed closer, a living thing hungry for them both. Emily's arm burned where the glass had cut her lungs screaming with each breath, but she focused on the boy's weight against her, his small hand clutching her shirt. She lifted him through the window, her muscles straining, then scrambled out after him as flames licked at the curtains. Outside, the cold air hit her like a wave, but she barely felt it. She carried the boy across the yard, her bare feet numb on the frozen ground, her vision blurred by tears and ash. Neighbors rushed forward, their voices a jumble of relief and awe as they took the child from her arms. The distant wail of sirens finally broke through the night, a belated promise of help. Emily set the boy down gently, her hands trembling as she brushed soot from his hair. She didn't look back at the crowd, didn't wait for questions or thanks. She slipped into her car, her body shaking, and drove away, leaving only singed footprints in the snow, proof of a moment when she'd answered her father's call. In the aftermath of the fire that had nearly claimed his life, Luke Wilson, a young orphan living with his grandmother, carried a weight far heavier than the smoke that had choked his lungs. At just 7 years old, he had already lost his parents to a car accident the previous year, a tragedy that left him tethered to the world only by his grandmother's love and the small, creaky house they shared. The fire, sparked by faulty Christmas lights, had erupted while his grandmother worked the night shift at the local hospital, leaving Luke alone in the darkness. The flames had devoured the walls with a ferocity that mirrored the chaos in his young heart. But it was the woman who had pulled him from the inferno who became the anchor of his thoughts. Her face, tear-streaked, framed by a ponytail, and marked by distinctive scars on her left arm, haunted him, not with fear but with a quiet reverence. She was his savior, a figure who had emerged from the smoke and carried him to safety before vanishing into the night. Luke became a boy of few words after the fire, his silence a shield against the memories that flickered like embers in his mind. The trauma lingered in his wide, searching eyes, but so did a spark of something else, an obsession with the woman who had risked everything for him. In the quiet moments when he sat alone, he would sketch her over and over, the curve of her ponytail, the tears that glistened on her cheeks, the markings on her arm that seemed to tell a story of their own. "My guardian angel," he would murmur when his grandmother gently pressed him about the drawings, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make her disappear entirely. His grandmother, a woman worn by years of hard work and loss, marveled at the consistency of his sketches. Despite his youth, Luke captured the same details each time, as if etching her image into his soul. She kept every drawing, tucking them into a folder she stored in a drawer, a quiet testament to the boy's unspoken gratitude. Among the few remnants of that night was a singed cotton bracelet, a simple homemade thing that had slipped from the woman's wrist during the rescue. To Luke, it was more than a trinket. It was a relic, a tangible piece of the moment he had been given a second chance at life. He kept it in a small wooden box under his bed, a secret treasure he would take out only when the weight of the world felt too heavy. Holding it in his small hands, he would trace its frayed edges, imagining the woman who had worn it, wondering where she was and why she had chosen to run into the flames for him. When his therapist, a kind woman with a knack for coaxing words from silent children, asked why the bracelet mattered so much, Luke's answer was simple yet profound. Because she could have stayed safe, but she came back for me. His voice trembled with a mix of awe and gratitude, as if he still couldn't believe that someone had deemed him worth saving. Meanwhile, Emily Sanders, the woman who had braved the fire, carried her own scars, both visible and hidden. The deep gash on her arm, stitched together with 15 careful sutures, was easy enough to dismiss as a kitchen mishap when coworkers asked. But the second-degree burns that marred her hands and forearms were harder to conceal, their raw, angry redness a constant reminder of the night she had acted on instinct. As a dispatcher at the local emergency call center, Emily was no stranger to crisis, but that night she had abandoned her post to answer a call her heart couldn't ignore. The decision cost her dearly. The burns forced her to take unpaid leave, her hands too tender to type or hold a phone for long. When security footage from a nearby gas station placed her car near the fire, her supervisor called her in for a meeting that felt more like an interrogation. "You left your station, Emily," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You went off duty without following protocol." Emily sat across from him, her bandaged arms hidden beneath the table, her heart pounding. "I was heading home," she said, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "I saw the fire and called it in." But the timeline didn't add up, and she knew it. The reprimand was formal, a stain on her record that deepened her already precarious financial struggles. Unable to perform her duties with her injured hands, she eventually resigned, trading the chaos of the dispatch center for the quiet rhythm of a night job at a local bakery. The owner, a gruff but kind man, didn't pry about the scars that peeked out from her long sleeves, and for that, Emily was grateful. Despite the hardships, Emily never regretted her choice. On the nights when her young daughter asked why they had to move to a smaller apartment, why mommy worked while the world slept and slept while the world moved, Emily would glance at her scarred arms and see not pain but purpose. The memory of the boy's face, small, frightened but alive, sustained her. She had honored her father's legacy, a firefighter who had taught her that courage meant running toward danger, not away from it. Her scars were her private vow, a silent promise she had kept without seeking praise or recognition. She never spoke of that night, not to her daughter, not to anyone. The scars were enough, a map of the moment she had chosen to be more than who she was. Years slipped by, each one carrying Luke further from that night, but never far enough to forget. When he was 14, his grandmother passed away, leaving him to navigate the uncertainty of the foster system. Yet, even in the face of loss, Luke's resilience shone through. He poured himself into his studies, finding solace in the logic of computer science, where lines of code offered a kind of control the world rarely did. By 18, he had created his first app, a small but innovative tool that caught the attention of tech enthusiasts. By 22, his startup had drawn major venture capital, and by 26, Luke Wilson had become Luke Harrison, adopting his grandmother's maiden name as a tribute to the woman who had raised him. As the billionaire founder of SecurityNet, a cybersecurity firm that redefined data protection, he was a success story, a phoenix risen from the ashes of his past. In 2024, nearly 2 decades after the fire, Emily, now 49 and still kneading dough at the same bakery, received a phone call that shattered the quiet routine of her life. It was 4 a.m., the hour when the world was still and the bakery's ovens were just beginning to warm. "Is this Emily Sanders?" a male voice asked, calm but insistent. Emily's heart skipped, her hands pausing over a tray of pastries. "Yes, who's calling at this hour?" she replied, her voice sharp with suspicion. "You lived in Bedford in 2005, correct?" The question sent a chill through her, one that had nothing to do with the February air seeping through the bakery's old windows. "Who is this?" she demanded, her pulse quickening. "Do you still have that cotton bracelet?" The words hit her like a blow, stealing her breath. She hung up, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She had never told anyone about the bracelet. Not her daughter, not her coworkers, not even her closest friends. How could a stranger know about it after all these years? The next morning, an unmarked envelope appeared at her apartment door. its contents shaking her to her core. Inside was a grainy photograph she had never seen before, a woman with a ponytail, carrying a small boy away from a burning house, the smoke swirling around them like a living thing. Someone had been there. Someone had seen her. That evening, as Emily folded laundry with the television humming in the background, a familiar name stopped her cold. A special report on America's youngest tech billionaires featured Luke Harrison, the camera lingering on his sleek office and his handsome, boyish face, a face that still carried echoes of the child she had pulled from the flames. Her heart raced as the camera panned across his desk, where a small wooden box sat, unassuming but unmistakable. It was the same box Luke had kept under his bed all those years ago, the one that held the singed cotton bracelet. Emily's hands stilled, the laundry forgotten, as she realized the truth. The boy she had saved had found her, and he had never forgotten. In the soft glow of her modest living room, Emily Sanders sat transfixed, staring at the television screen where Luke Harrison's face filled the frame. Behind him, perched unassumingly on a shelf, was a small wooden box, its intricate carvings mirroring the one her father had crafted for her when she was a girl. The sight of it sent a jolt through her, stirring memories she'd buried deep. The interviewer's voice cut through her reverie, asking, "Mr. Harrison, if you could travel back in time, what's the one thing you'd most want to do?" Luke's polished demeanor softened, his eyes betraying a flicker of vulnerability that seemed to crack the facade of the tech billionaire he'd become. "I'd find the woman who saved my life during a house fire when I was 6, he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I'd give her back what was rightfully hers." The camera lingered on his face, capturing the weight of his words, before cutting to a commercial break. But for Emily, time stopped. Her coffee mug slipped from her trembling hands, shattering on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing the fracture of the quiet anonymity she'd guarded for 20 years. Emily had never sought praise for what she'd done. The act of running into that burning house on River Road in 2005, barefoot and driven by instinct, wasn't about glory. It was about a child's life. She'd carried the weight of that night in silence, her scars hidden beneath long sleeves, even in the sweltering heat of summer. Those silvery burns on her left forearm, winding like a map of courage and sacrifice, were her private talisman, a reminder of a moment she'd never meant for the world to see. Yet now, as the television flickered with ads, she felt exposed, as if the walls of her carefully constructed life were crumbling. Recognition, it seemed, had found her, unbidden and unwelcome. That night, sleep eluded her. Standing before her bedroom mirror, Emily traced the scars on her arm, each ridge a testament to the flames she'd faced. She could still feel the heat, hear the crackle of the fire, and see the terrified eyes of the 6-year-old boy she'd pulled from the inferno. The memory was vivid, a wound that never fully healed, though she'd learned to live with its ache. She'd been a dispatcher then, working at Bedford's fire station, just like her father before her. The job had been her lifeline, a way to honor his legacy, but it hadn't shielded her from the chaos of that night, or the scrutiny that followed. She'd left the dispatch center not long after, her reasons tangled in bureaucratic reprimands and whispered rumors, but she'd never regretted her choice to act. Still, the thought of her story being unearthed now after 2 decades filled her with a quiet dread. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a call from her daughter Claire, who lived in Boston, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. "Mom, something weird's going on," Claire said, her words rushed. "A private investigator reached out asking about you and some fire in 2005. What's this about?" Emily sank into her worn armchair, the weight of the past pressing against her chest. "It's an old story, sweetie," she replied, her voice calm but strained. "Nothing important." Claire wasn't convinced. "Well, it's important to someone. He said a billionaire's looking for you." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. After hanging up, Emily's gaze drifted to her bedside table. She opened the drawer and lifted out a small wooden box, its twin sitting in Luke Harrison's office thousands of miles away. Inside lay a simple cotton bracelet, its edges singed black, a child's craft project that had somehow become the fragile thread tying her past to her present. She held it gently as if it might disintegrate, her heart caught between pride and fear. Emily's quiet life unraveled with startling speed. A local reporter, digging through town records, pieced together her identity and published a speculative article. Bedford's mystery hero, local woman may have saved tech billionaire. The story spread like wildfire. News vans descended on her apartment building, their cameras and microphones transforming her sanctuary into a stage. Former colleagues from the dispatch center, people she hadn't spoken to in years, gave interviews, their voices tinged with awe and disbelief. Emily Sanders? She was so quiet, so unassuming, one said. I can't believe she did something that brave and never said a word. The manager of Bedford's fire station, where her father had once been a fixture, spoke to reporters with a mix of pride and protectiveness. I kept her secret all these years, he said, but I'm amazed this story's finally coming out. For Emily, the attention was a violation, a theft of something sacred. She stopped answering her door, called in sick to the bakery where she worked, and drew her curtains tight against the world. Her act of courage, once a private cornerstone of her identity, had been turned into a public spectacle without her consent. I never wanted this, she told Claire over the phone, her voice breaking. I just did what anyone would have done. Claire's response was gentle but firm. Mom, not everyone would have run into a burning building barefoot. And this guy, he spent 20 years trying to find you. Don't you think you owe it to yourself to at least talk to him? Emily's silence was her answer, a fortress she wasn't ready to breach. Social media erupted with #FindEmilyBedford, a hashtag that carried both admiration and suspicion. Some praised her as a hero, a selfless savior who'd risked everything for a stranger. Others questioned why she'd stayed anonymous for so long, their speculation twisting into conspiracy theories. Amateur sleuths unearthed her old disciplinary record from the dispatch center, spinning it into narratives of guilt or hidden motives. Why hide a good deed unless you're hiding something worse? One popular thread read. The accusations cut deeper than the burns ever had, each word a reminder of how quickly the world could turn a private sacrifice into public fodder. On a rainy August morning in 2025, Bedford's sleepy Main Street buzzed with unfamiliar energy. 4 sleek black SUVs rolled up outside the town's modest fire station, their polished exteriors stark against the weathered brick building. Security personnel in dark suits stepped out first, their eyes scanning the growing crowd of onlookers and reporters. Then from the second vehicle, Luke Harrison emerged, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked more like a local than a man worth $4.2 billion. Camera flashes lit up his face as he offered a polite nod to the crowd. Mr. Harrison, are you here about Emily Sanders? A reporter shouted. Luke raised a hand, his expression calm but resolute. I've come to speak with Mayor Collins and Fire Chief Peterson, he said. After that, I'll make a statement. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. When Luke stepped in and out again, flanked by the mayor and fire chief, their faces betrayed a mix of astonishment and unease. The crowd fell silent as Luke began to speak, his voice carrying across the damp street. Citizens of Bedford, he said, his tone steady but laced with emotion. 20 years ago, I was a scared 6-year-old trapped in a burning house on River Road. Every expert who reviewed the case later said, I had less than 2 minutes before the fire would have taken me. One woman acting on instinct and courage changed the course of my life. His words hung in the air, heavy with gratitude and purpose. For Emily, watching from behind her curtains, the world seemed to tilt. Her heart caught between the past she'd tried to forget and the present she could no longer escape. The fire department was still 7 agonizing minutes away, their sirens a distant wail that couldn't pierce the roar of the flames consuming the house. Luke stood before the crowd, his voice steady but thick with emotion, as if the weight of that night 20 years ago still pressed against his chest. For a fleeting moment, he paused, his eyes glistening, caught in the grip of a memory so vivid it threatened to pull him back into the smoke and heat. Someone had made the difference between life and death that night. Someone, a stranger, had chosen to risk everything for a boy she didn't know. A boy who was now a man standing before this crowd, alive because of her. Luke motioned to an assistant, who quickly set up a portable screen, its edges catching the late afternoon light. This footage has never been shown publicly, he said, his voice carrying a quiet reverence. The grainy video flickered to life, captured by a neighbor's security camera perfectly angled to record the moment. There she was, Emily emerging from the choking smoke, her arms wrapped tightly around a young Luke. Her hair was singed, patches of it blackened and frayed, her bare feet leaving smears of blood on the ground with each determined step. Her face, though blurred by the low resolution, radiated a fierce resolve, as if the fire itself couldn't break her will. The crowd watched in hushed awe, some leaning forward, others clutching hands to their chests, as the image of her courage burned into their minds. "For 20 years I've searched for her," Luke continued, his voice steadying as he recounted the relentless pursuit. "I hired investigators, combed through hospital records for anyone treated for burns in Bedford that night. I interviewed every witness, tracked down every lead, no matter how faint. And finally I found her, still here in Bedford, still working night shifts, still hiding the scars of that night under long sleeves." The crowd stirred, a murmur rippling through them like wind through leaves, as they processed the quiet heroism of a woman who had carried her bravery in silence for 2 decades. Luke's gaze swept over the faces before him, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "I'm here today to announce that I've purchased the Bedford fire station and the surrounding land. The town council has approved my plan to transform it into a state-of-the-art emergency response center." A gasp rose from the crowd, soft but electric, as he continued. "It will be the most advanced facility of its kind in the state, equipped with cutting-edge technology and training resources that small towns like ours rarely see. But there was one condition for this project, a condition I insisted on. This center will bear the name of the woman who showed me what true courage looks like. The Emily Sanders Emergency Response Center." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of emotion crashing over them, but Luke wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, raising a hand to quiet the reporters who were already shouting questions. "I'm also establishing a $10 million scholarship fund for the children of first responders, to honor the sacrifices made by those who run toward danger when others run away." The murmurs grew louder, a mix of awe and disbelief as the weight of his announcement settled over the gathering. Then Luke reached into his pocket, his movements deliberate, almost reverent, and pulled out a narrow wooden box. He opened it slowly, revealing a faded cotton bracelet, its edges frayed and discolored from fire damage. "This," he said, holding it up for all to see, "fell from her wrist as she carried me to safety. For 20 years I've kept it. To me, it's more than a possession. It's a reminder of the moment my life was saved, a symbol of courage I could never repay." The crowd fell silent, the air heavy with emotion. Some wiped tears from their cheeks. Others stood frozen, caught in the gravity of his words. "I'd like to return this to its rightful owner," Luke said, his voice softening as he scanned the sea of faces. "Emily Sanders, if you're out there, this belongs to you." At the back of the crowd, half hidden in the dappled shade of a towering maple tree, Emily stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't wanted to come today. The invitation had arrived like an unwelcome guest, stirring memories she'd spent years trying to bury. Yet something had pulled her here, a quiet, unshakable need to understand why the past had suddenly reached out to claim her. As Luke spoke, his words cracked open a door she'd kept locked for decades. Seeing the bracelet on the screen, the one she'd woven with her daughter in a moment of simple joy so many years ago, unleashed a flood of emotions, grief, pride, and a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace. It was as if her story, one she'd carried alone for so long, was no longer just hers to bear. As the crowd began to disperse, their voices buzzing with excitement over Luke's announcement, Emily found herself moving toward the fire station instead of slipping away as she'd planned. Her steps were hesitant at first, each one a battle against the instinct to remain invisible. A security guard noticed her approach, his expression polite but firm. "Ma'am, this area is closed to the public right now," he said, holding up a hand. Emily paused, her breath catching in her throat. Then, with a quiet resolve, she rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate web of burn scars that spiraled up her forearm, their pattern unmistakable, a perfect match to the marks visible in the video. The guard's eyes widened, recognition dawning as he spoke softly into his radio. Moments later, Luke emerged from the station, his face a mix of hope and disbelief. For a long moment they stood there, two souls forever bound by a single night. The woman who had run into the fire, her body scarred but her spirit unbroken, and the boy she had carried out, now a man shaped by her courage. Neither spoke at first, the silence heavy with the weight of 20 years. Finally, Emily broke it, her voice soft but steady. "You kept it all these years," she said, her eyes fixed on the wooden box in his hand. Luke nodded, his throat tight. "It was all I had of you. My grandmother used to say it was proof angels existed." Emily's lips curved into a faint smile tinged with sadness. "I'm no angel," she said quietly, "just a dispatcher who couldn't follow protocol that night." Her words carried the weight of someone who had replayed that moment countless times, questioning, wondering, but never regretting. "You're the reason I'm alive," Luke said simply, his voice raw with gratitude. "And the reason I founded my company. Our motto, when seconds matter, I chose it because of you. You taught me what those seconds mean." The next day, Bedford witnessed something extraordinary. The official announcement ceremony for the Emily Sanders Emergency Response Center became more than a ribbon cutting. It was a celebration of a heroism that had gone unrecognized for far too long. Emily, after much persuasion, agreed to attend, though every instinct screamed for her to stay in the shadows. As she stepped onto the podium, standing beneath a banner emblazoned with her father's favorite quote, "Courage is fear that has said its prayers," she felt the eyes of the community she'd called home for nearly 50 years. Her heart raced, but her voice when she spoke was steady, grounded in the truth she'd carried all these years. "I didn't do anything special," she began, her words soft but resonant. "I just couldn't stand by and do nothing. My father was a firefighter. He gave his life saving children from a fire. That night, when I saw Luke through the window, trapped in that burning house, I heard my dad's voice in my head, clear as day. Always do right, Emmy." I didn't think about the danger. I just moved." For the first time in public, Emily rolled up her sleeve, revealing the scars that had marked her life ever since. "These," she said, holding up her arm, "remind me every day that I made the right choice. I never needed thanks. I never wanted recognition. But standing here today," her voice faltered, and she looked down, her eyes catching on the wooden box Luke held. He stepped forward, his own emotions barely contained, and opened it, offering her the bracelet. "This belongs to you," he said, his voice thick with meaning. Emily reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the faded cotton. In that moment, the weight of 20 years seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet understanding that her act of courage had rippled far beyond that fiery night, touching lives she could never have imagined. Emily's trembling fingers closed around the worn cotton bracelet, its purple and green threads faded, but still vibrant with meaning. "I wove this with my little girl," Luke said, his voice low, carrying the weight of memory. "It was her favorite colors. We made it just days before the fire tore everything apart. For 20 years, it's been my anchor, like a charm keeping me safe." His eyes, shadowed by years of gratitude and grief, met hers, and Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She tried to smile, but tears spilled over, tracing paths down her cheeks. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a lesson from long ago. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Emily. It's standing in the fire, terrified and stepping forward anyway." As Luke's arms wrapped around her, warm and steady, the crowd around them surged to their feet, their applause a roaring tide of recognition. From the edge of the room, Emily's daughter, her face alight with pride, broke free from her seat and rushed to join them. Their embrace became a knot of 3 lives, tangled by fate, forged in flames, and bound by a single fleeting choice made 2 decades before in a smoke-choked hallway. The next morning, the newspaper headline blazed, "Bedford's Fire Angel Honored. Woman who saved billionaire finally steps into the light." But for Emily, the real moment of clarity came later, when the crowds had vanished and silence settled over the old fire station. She stood alone before the memorial wall, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her father's name. Each stroke felt like a conversation, a quiet communion with the man who'd shaped her. Luke found her there, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. "I bought this place," he said, his voice gentle but resolute. "For you. Though if I'm honest, it's always belonged to you." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with an understanding that went beyond deeds or titles. "We hold on to what matters most," she murmured, "by letting it go, by giving it to others." The words felt like a truth she'd carried all her life, only now finding the courage to speak. Emily turned down the offer to name the new center after her alone. Instead, it became the Sanders-Wilson Memorial Emergency Response Center, a tribute to her father and Luke's grandmother, two souls whose sacrifices had rippled through time, shaping their lives with love and loss. She didn't return to her old life at the bakery or the dispatch desk. Instead, she stepped into a new role as the community outreach coordinator, pouring her heart into teaching free first aid and emergency preparedness classes to Bedford's residents. Her quiet confidence and unassuming warmth drew people in, especially children, who whispered tales of the fire angel, but found in Emily a mentor who felt like a friend. Each morning, she arrived with a tray of steaming coffee for the young firefighters and paramedics, many of whom had grown up on stories of her father's bravery. Her modest home, a short walk from the station, was a haven she shared with her daughter, now grown and occasionally visiting from Boston, her own life shaped by her mother's unspoken heroism. "Everyone has a moment that defines them," Emily often told her students, her voice steady but laced with conviction. "When yours comes, I hope you choose with your heart, even if it scares you." In the main training room, a simple frame hung on the wall holding two treasures: the restored cotton bracelet, its colors a quiet testament to survival, and a handwritten quote: "Courage is a decision made in seconds that echoes through lifetimes." Beside it, two photographs told a story of legacy, one of Emily, soot-streaked and fierce, carrying a young Luke from the inferno, and another of her father, proud in his uniform, his eyes kind but resolute. Together, they spoke of service, of lives given to others without hesitation. A documentary about the center captured what many in Bedford felt. A young firefighter recruit, her voice thick with admiration, said, "When people ask me what a hero is, I don't picture some Cape Crusader. I see Ms. Sanders in the break room, pouring coffee, her arms marked with scars she doesn't hide anymore, just quietly doing what needs to be done." Emily's daughter, Anthony's daughter, now a paramedic herself, shared her own truth. "Mom never spoke about that night, not once. But she always told me the right thing and the easy thing are almost never the same. Now I know why." For Emily, the deepest change was within. The woman who'd once shrouded her scars in long sleeves now wore short ones, her arms bared without shame. The privacy she'd clung to for decades dissolved, replaced by a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The courage to be seen, to let her story light the way for others. On the first anniversary of the center's opening, Luke returned. He found Emily in a classroom, surrounded by wide-eyed elementary schoolers, teaching them how to call 911 with calm precision. Later, as they stood together, he asked, "Does it ever feel strange, having your story out there after keeping it locked away for so long?" Emily gazed out at the training yard, where recruits practiced rescues under the morning sun. She thought of the weight she'd carried alone, the nights she'd woken from dreams of smoke and screams. "Not strange," she said at last. "Just different, like I've been hauling something heavy for years, and now there are hands reaching out to help." Her fingers brushed the new bracelet on her wrist, woven by local children inspired by her story, while the original rested safely in its frame. "Not everyone gets a thank you for doing what's right," she added softly. "But if you choose well, the world doesn't forget. One small act can shift a moment, a life, maybe even everything."